You've given us a fantastic way to start this conference today by understanding more about the social science and the marketing evidence we have so far about what works and what doesn't work in terms of driving behavior change and education around these issues. I wonder if I could ask you to speculate a little bit outside of your topics to begin to help us tie them to digital media strategies. Based on the evidence that you've shared with us so far, can you respond with what you think are some of the common pitfalls that happen when folks try to create digital solutions to address environmental issues, based on the knowledge that you have as experts on behavior change?
Yeah, I can start because we do a lot of research on digital activism, and what we found is that the ones that, I guess one of the big pitfalls is viewing digital media as just a digital form of print media or of traditional broadcast media without realizing that we're inherently bidirectional now. And so what a lot of digital media strategies do is they take something that could be on radio, television, or in print form and they put it on a website. And that's not taking advantage of what I see as psychologically the biggest thing that digital offers us, which is the opportunity to create communities of practice with your audience. You give up some control when you allow people to engage publicly with you. But the truth is, we've lost control of communication. We're just still kind of thinking that we have some of it in the broadcast form. And so I think that's something to really think through, that you're not just taking content and messaging and putting it in digital format, that you're completely reshifting the way that you communicate with your audience. Even the word audience, that you're communicating with your with activists or with your community. That's one.
Yeah, I would just add to that what we've seen is very often people just kind of jump to the tool. We have an idea, we want to do Facebook, or we want to do an app. Okay, and that's great, but not ignoring, I think, what I talked about, the underlying barriers and benefits. So if just information is all they need, then that may work for you. But if there are other barriers in play, maybe it's a structural element of a program you want them to participate in, or access to a program. It's important to not ignore those sort of underlying factors and to take the time to look at your audience and make sure that you're addressing those needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing is that you can now have more dialogue, right? As opposed to messages just going out, you can have exchange, and so you can do what you guys are saying, you can learn about your audience, which I think is very important. Just like with recipes, there are never any that would apply across the board. And one of the great things about the way you guys do things is you always start with your audience. Like, I've been reading papers and I love that, because you really have to think about what your specific target audience barriers are. And so I think with improving media strategies, when you can have so much feedback and you can sort of trace live how things are happening on Twitter or whatever, it's giving you so much more ability to actually have direct dialogue.
Great. Let's open it up for questions, and we'll pass the microphone down to you.
If I could just add to that.
Sure.
So at WWF, one thing we're doing, where there's so many digital media channels available now, is we're working on ensuring that the touch and the feel and the experience is the same across those media channels. Historically, you went into one and you got one experience, and then you went to Twitter and you got a little bit of a different one. So that audience member was getting almost starting from the back foot again with the next media channel. And we've had great success the beginning of great success by consistently having the experience across the digital media channels.
It was mentioned that people in developing countries are more at risk, or have just as much, if not more, to fear with these climate change issues. And so, what would you say are some of the challenges, and how would you spread awareness in areas where most of the population does not have access to technology, or technology is not that pervasive as it is here?
Yes, so those of us who work on climate change, we often assume that everybody knows, everybody's heard about it, everybody has taken a position, and that just patently isn't true.
Exactly.
Like my colleagues have done a study in India, for example, they call it climate change in the Indian line, and the average Indian still hasn't heard of climate change or global warming, although very interestingly, the average Indian reports in response to the survey questions having noticed changes in in the environmental conditions in which they live in their community, weather-related changes, what have you. In other words, they personally noticed that something is different, but they've never heard the term global warming or climate change, or the many different linguistic equivalents in India. And so it becomes, I think that the question you're asking is, or sort of reinterpreting your question to talk to mean there's a real importance to speak first, okay, when it's easier to influence the way people think when they don't have prior conceptions that somebody else introduced to them that are at odds with what you want to share. It's easier to open up people's minds when they're essentially already open and they're observing something than it is to get them to change their minds. But often it comes back to sort of my fundamental premise, which is that we have to do it simply. A simple explanation of the changes that Indians, for example, are seeing in their environment will help them place that into context, and will help them then sort of coming to what some of the other panelists have talked about, will help them make better decisions about the decisions that they personally face in their own lives. And there's a really interesting, I won't call it a tension, there's an interesting dynamic between what all of us have said. And the dynamic would be helping people to understand the issue fairly, appropriately, but at a very high level, which is sort of where I open it up, and then ultimately helping them make better decisions that are good for them as individuals or as families, or whether those behaviors are better for us as a society. Those are different challenges, but there are. I love this panel because I know all of these people and I know all of their wonderful work, and everything that they said to me made perfect sense into a larger whole. But it's very clear that we're working on different but related pieces of the same overarching public engagement challenge.
And one quick note on, I think you were talking about the medium themselves. And I think it's not that the emerging economies don't have anything digital, it's that they have different technologies. Yeah. And so I think it's looking at, so what we're finding is a lot of developing countries don't have a lot of the traditional technological infrastructure we have, but mobile's huge. Yeah. And so, so we can sometimes skip ahead to mobile. We also have found success with really low-tech solutions. So one of the projects we work with, Invisible Children, installed really low-tech antennas and radios, just so that the people in these villages could communicate when the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, was coming. And then what they did is they built on top of that, they are communicating just via this early warning radio network, and then they're communicating back to a hub that anybody in the world can follow. So all of these kind of on-the-ground low-tech radios are connecting to an app called the Early Warning Radio Network, or the Crisis Tracker, the LRA Crisis Tracker, which is an app that anyone can download on your computer or iPhone and see. So we can connect low-tech on-the-ground technologies and mobile technologies with some of the larger infrastructure that we have in the developed world. So I don't think they're technology less. It's just figuring out what works in these different countries.
I think in the developing world, unfortunately, it's more a question of adaptation than mitigation. So here we've been talking about ways to prevent, further climate change, but in a lot of places that aren't really adding to the problem, it's a question of how do you adapt. There's so few resources that as soon as changes happen, the impacts are so much stronger, as you were saying. So I think here technology becomes very important because there are programs like, for example, USAID, because I'm in DC now, I hear a lot of these amazing programs that use, for example, cell phones. You can give people just a tiny amount of money on their account, and that will motivate them to communicate about all kinds of things that are happening in their areas. You can map out the changes, and you can help to predict when various kinds of natural events are coming, help people prepare for them, etc. So you're really, in the developing world, you're dealing with a completely different issue. Here we have this perceived conflict between the economy and the environment, how do we get policy through? There you're really dealing with how do we, bring in technology in a way that both continues the process of development while also making the development resilient. That's really the challenge there.